This podcast and its related content are intended for listeners aged 18 and above. Some episodes may include sensitive topics such as trauma, abuse, or mental health struggles that could be emotionally triggering or distressing. Listener discretion is strongly advised. This podcast is created for educational and awareness purpose only and does not constitute legal, medical, or psychological advice. Welcome to Sunoh, the listening circle. The name Sunoh in Hindi means to listen, and more importantly, to be understood. This podcast aims to create a circle of understanding for South Asian women primarily, and anyone else who may be interested in these topics, from changing family structures to work-life balance, motherhood, singlehood, and much more. We are hoping to shake off stigma one conversation at a time. This season, we're looking at separation and divorce in the South Asian context. And I'm your host, Harveen. Each of us may know or have known someone who is separated or divorced. However, it is ever so often whispered about, judged from the outside, or reduced to labels. But behind every divorce is a human story of love, hope, endurance, courage, and eventually choice. This is not a conversation about blaming or reliving pain. It's about understanding what happens inside a person, especially a woman, when the life she imagined no longer fits. An immigrant childhood, born to Indian parents in the US, married in 20s, kids, and then followed by the quiet ending of her marriage. Single motherhood, co-parenting, opening up to a life with new possibilities, and alongside rebuilding herself, the journey to finding her own. Today, I'm joined by Karishma Ismail, who's dismantling many different stigmas and breaking the cycles to rewrite generational rules in her own way. Karishma studied psychology from the University of Virginia and has had a strong career in consulting, training, coaching, to becoming a successful entrepreneur and role model for many others. Karishma is a success coach and also the founder of Empower Desi. After years of living inside the good girl rules, doing everything right, and still feeling disconnected, she began a deep journey of rewriting what worth, love, and freedom actually mean. Today, she supports South Asian women who feel stuck in perfectionism, people-pleasing, and cultural pressure to come home to themselves. Her work blends practical coaching with real conversations about identity, relationships, and emotional freedom. Her podcast, Happily Divorced with Karishma, has plethora of learnings to draw from and hope our audience will also give that a listen. Thank you so much, Karishma, for being here and for trusting this space.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Harveen.
Tell us a bit more about the good girl concept that you talk about, Karishma, and how did you come to that realization for yourself?
I think as a Desi woman, or Asian women generally, we have these parameters of what we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to be. And every one of us comes into our families, into our households with these unwritten rules of we should be this way, we should be that way, right? Being seen, but not being seen too much, being academically on top of things, but not speaking too loudly. And it's just all these paradoxes are embedded in our South Asian roots or upbringing. And this has been there, generationally. And we all have this sort of good girl mask that we feel like we have to play. Some of us reject it, but most of us kind of hold ourselves hostage to these rules that are basically unattainable to meet. And for me, it's going through a journey where I did all the things that I was supposed to do. I went through school, got the career, got the degree, got the man. I married someone at 23, almost 24. It was a love marriage. And my parents were like, "Are you sure you want to get married?" And I said, "I do." And it was interesting because every person that I dated before was a Caucasian guy. My now ex-husband was Desi, Pakistani. And I brought the kind of guy home that my parents would approve of, that my father would approve of specifically. And it's interesting because I rejected all those things in high school, college, and I married exactly that. And I kind of went right into what I was supposed to do, these unwritten rules that I had picked up along the way, got married, had the perfect wedding, like all the things, right? It's like we had twins together. And we kind of were the picture perfect family. Well, we were married for 17 years, but there was just part of me that was unhappy. And our marriage was deeply dysfunctional for a lot of the time. And just at some point, you start opening your eyes to what really is and stop telling yourself what it should be or how it should be or justifying to yourself why it is or isn't. I mean, for me, it was like a deep, like unraveling that happened slowly over time until a point where it was like, okay, I can't do this anymore. And I'm not honoring myself. I'm not honoring who I am underneath the mask, the labels, the conditioning, all the good girl shoulds. And at some point, it was time to let go and be free.
That gives language to something so complex, Karishma. I'm still letting it sink in that how you were trying to fit into that box, and definitely very relatable, I'm sure, to many of our listeners. And then seeking that external validation, being the rebel as you were, and then coming back to that realization that you've actually done exactly what was expected of you in some way. So, a lot to unpack here. Let's talk about where you are currently. How would you describe the current chapter of your life, Karishma? Building your brand and voice. Why was that important to you?
When I look back at the past, I'm going to say a past life, which is the current life, but it's the past life. Like, I feel like sometimes we go through stages in our life and it's almost like we complete one version of ourselves and we step into a different version. But I look back at that journey and I don't even recognize myself because it's so different than who I am today. So when I look back, for me, I always say like the divorce was my greatest act of self love. And it was the moment when I put myself first. And I had this like realization that all the BS I was telling myself about staying for the kids and all the things was all just not true. And when I decided to honor me, and the divorce was that like ending of living my life for what I'm supposed to be and choosing to be like who I really am and kind of like letting go of that old identity, almost like a reincarnation. It almost feels like a death of one part and then awakening to another part. But as I've kind of looked the last few years, I believe life reflects who you are and how you feel about yourself. So if I believe I'm worthy from the inside, my life is going to bring in examples of worthiness. My life today has been like a slow undoing of what I should be for ex-husband, for what I should be for my parents, for my culture, for everybody else. And just like coming back home, like, what does Karishma really want? What is important to me? What do I want? What do I value? What do I love? How do I give me what I think you should give me? Because the truth is, nobody can give to you what you can only give to yourself. So as I've kind of stepped into these last few years of coming back home to myself, my life, my business has reflected that inner abundance, that inner joy, that inner connection. So for me today, my twins are 14. I have a boy and a girl. We're extremely close. There's been so much, and I share my podcast, like just so much generational rewriting of narratives on things like dating or going to a dance or these things that were really taboo for me growing up. I wasn't allowed to talk to boys. I wasn't allowed to see a boy, God forbid. Like I was asked out and I wasn't allowed to go to homecoming with the boy that I really like because my mom was like, oh, hell no. Like, so I get to unravel all that stuff and have this open conversation with my kids today and be a safe place for them to explore these changes within themselves, explore what it's like to be in the world, to be with friends, to be with relationships, to be with schooling and all these things that we all went through. So it's been like life is giving me today in this next chapter, amazing relationship. I have an amazing life partner that I've been with for 3 years, and my business is reflecting like a new level of abundance. So there's just all these things that have happened as a result of me finally saying yes to myself. Like literally a month ago, my book that I've co-authored was published called She Says Yes to Herself. So it's just like literally crazy, coincidences of just life bringing me more and more of that.
First of all, congratulations on your book. We definitely need to read that and have some more quotes from you from the book as well. You said something very interesting. You said it was also an undoing of a lot of should be's and going within in your personal journey of, self-love and figuring out that divorce was the greatest act of self-love, as you said. When I was thinking about starting this podcast,
I felt that I'm talking about a topic which isn't really talked about as openly as we should, even though living abroad and generally in most metropolitan cities in India as well, divorce is becoming increasingly common. But there were many people that also have shared that actually it is more common than we know. It's just something that we are not openly talking about. There are not a lot of statistics easily available on it. And I wanted to hear your perspective on it because coming from an expat community and the diaspora, this is a conversation for us to have. But am I wrong in my perception that there is still a taboo and it isn't as talked about in our South Asian communities? What has been your experience, both personally as well as, what you're hearing through the podcast journey that you have?
That's a great question. It's interesting because when I look back at my upbringing, everything that I heard about people getting divorced, it's interesting. I would never hear about the guy. I would always hear about the woman. It was like, oh, she got divorced. Nobody cares about the dude. It was she got divorced. She's a single mom. She has 2 kids. She married for money. She didn't marry for money. She cheated on him. And it was so crazy. Again, this is like just what I was fed throughout the course of my life, through my religious communities, through everything. Nobody ever talked about him. It's interesting because I had a few months on dating apps after I got separated. It was always like, this perception of, oh my God, he's a single father. Like, that's so sexy. Like, he's able to take care of children. And oh my God, like he's putting his children first. It's so amazing. But then when you're a woman who's got 2 kids, all of a sudden you have baggage and it's still there today. And it makes me really angry. Well, because it's still there today. And it's not just in the South Asian community. I think it's generally, there's still those two very different perspectives of what a divorced woman looks like. I have a friend who I met recently. She's also a divorced Desi mom with 2 kids. And, she's with this guy who happens to not have kids, who's a little bit younger than her. And when her friends found out that she's with this guy, they were like, oh, but you have baggage. How come you're with him? How come he's choosing you? So those types of conversations are still there. And I think this is why this is one of those things that kept me tethered in my marriage for so long, because who wants to be that person who's taboo, talked about all the things, right? And it kept me unconsciously in my marriage for a long time. And I actually met a lot of women, Indian women that have come to me throughout the course of just connecting, networking, LinkedIn, people like you, just different people, different stories. And that taboo, that social stigma is still there. And it's so deep. And I'm talking about, I am American. I've been in this country for 40 years of my life, and I still see this. And again, I don't know if it's because I'm Muslim, I'm part of a culture, but I don't think it's a Muslim thing. I don't think it's any religious thing. I think it's just still there, that even though like we're kind of giving permission more to it, there's still all this like baggage and this social weight, this social stigma that still affects women today. And when I got divorced, it was interesting because a lot of my close friends didn't know the depth of the problems that we were having. But when I did tell them, it was like, oh, but why? Like, why can't you make it work? It was all these things. And I was like, guys, like, it's been like this and this and this and this. And they were like, okay. And then when there was an incident that happened with my ex, it was still like, Karishma, how could you leave? It was like, are you guys not aware of like how messed up the situation is? And somehow you're telling me to stay in this thing that's very dysfunctional. And clearly, they're rejecting me or they're judging me. So I found a lot of my quote unquote close friends that were like sisters left my life. And I'm grateful for that because I always feel like life shows you who's actually there for you. And life will sometimes show you who's not there for you. But even some of my single friends that were comfortable in having girls' nights out with me, now all of a sudden when I was available or separated, they also got threatened. And this is like, I'm talking about a couple of my Caucasian friends. So it's been really interesting just to experience that divorce felt like a disease. And all of a sudden, it's like now people are threatened. Like the men are going to look at you differently. The men are going to pursue you, jealousy. And so when Happily Divorced with Karishma, my podcast was birthed back in March, it was like, I wanted to create a space where it's like, oh my God, if only I'd met someone who looked like me, that had given me permission to be happy, divorced, it would have completely changed potentially my past, my history. my intention was like, if I can help one woman, help her find who she is in the depths of all this nonsense, like my purpose is complete. And even that happily divorced with Karishma has pissed off a lot of people. People cringe when I tell them the name of your podcast, but it's on purpose. It's not to trigger you, but it's to like help you, like jar you enough to be like, wait a minute, what? How is that possible? What does that mean? And just those that want to experience it, great. Those that don't, I'm okay with that too.
I mean, if it counts for anything, I love the name. And I would think that many listeners will also feel seen by what you've just said, Karishma, because both on the kind of information download that's happening, and some of these are also sometimes subtle. I think you've been very open about sharing some of the very overt things coming your way. And these are the people to cut out and change your dynamics with the people you're interacting with. But sometimes it's even more subtle. And that's where it gets so hard to decipher. So thank you also for validating that it is still a taboo in so many different ways, whether it's Germany or US or South Asia, it's present everywhere in just different forms. Maybe we can go into a little bit of a summary of, how were your growing up years to the cultural context, the kind of values you were also absorbing from your community and people on love, marriage, independence. What was all that for you while growing up?
I come from obviously an immigrant family, first generation. So we came into the US when I was 5, and we actually moved to New York. New York is a very heavily immigrant society, a lot of Desi people. At age 10, we actually moved to a very small town in Richmond, Virginia, a small state, small town, very Caucasian, very white. So we were the minority in that. And at the same time, we kind of went from a really large religious community to a smaller religious community where everybody knew everybody. So now all of a sudden I go from being where there's a lot of Desi people or Indian people to coming into a society where it's all white, basically. And for the most part, through high school, even graduation, it was a very like live in the white world. There's very few minorities, but you had this like just being able to fit in and belong in the Caucasian world and then still having these very Indian values. I wasn't allowed to go to sleepovers. I wasn't allowed to get out too much. And it's interesting because I'm the older daughter. My brother came in 3 years after me. But it's like dating was absolutely like not even on the cards. Like everything I kind of got, the privileges I got, I almost feel like I had to fight for. Like here in the US, at 15, you get your permit. And then at 16, you get your license. Well, at 16 and a half, I was like still begging my mom to let me drive, even like 5-10 minutes on my own. My brother, on the other hand, my parents had him backing in and out of the driveway at 14. And then when he was growing up in high school, I'm in 12th grade, barely able to get out and do things socially. He at 9th grade, he's out late. 16, he had the car keys. So it's like there was such a paradox of like me having to fight for every privilege that was like a normal privilege compared to my friends group. And with my brother, just like, here it is. Like, you don't have to earn it. Here it is. And for me, it always felt like a battle of like, I have to prove that I'm worthy. And there was always this like need to prove and prove and prove. Today, I feel like I don't have to prove. I can actually just be. And that's been like the biggest gift of my personal journey of empowerment. But even coming into my business, 5-6 years ago, I had this like deep desire to prove that I was worthy. And I was willing to do whatever I could to show you that I like belonged. And there was such this like deep inner fight within me constantly because I never felt like I was worthy because of all such situations, right? Like people's invalidation of you becomes our own invalidation of ourselves. With career, with business, even with love, even with my partner today too. It's like after the divorce, it took, I would say 2 to 3 years of like, he'd always be like, Karishma, why are you fighting? Like, I'm here. Like, why are you fighting to get away from me? Why can't you receive that I'm here? And you don't have to do anything for me to be here for you. Like, I already am. And I could see it now, like 2 years of just me constantly fighting for my limitations and never allowing me to actually receive love, the abundance. So there's been this constant fight within. And then I can see kind of looking back, it's like, oh my God, it's just exhausting to have to fight for everything because you feel like, because somebody outside tells you like you're not enough because of your gender because you're a girl. So there's all of that stuff. And I think there's a lot of us that can relate to that on a deep level, or just expectations put on us to be perfect, to be the achiever, to be accomplished, to be responsible as the daughter, mother, wife, and the list goes on.
I think proving that I am worthy and having that as a very big part of early childhood and growing up experience is what maybe cascades into our adulthood choices and how we experience people, relationships, even friendships, not just marriages. And I'm curious to know how or what made you come back to yourself. Like, was there a point in time of your marriage where you realized that, okay, this isn't for me, this is what I need, and hence I'm making that choice?
So there's a few different things. Actually, there's two probably big pivotal moments for me. One is, so when I started my coaching business in, let's say, March 2020, I was part of a real estate investor group, and I quit the corporate job a year ago. I was sort of soul searching for a while, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. I knew I desired flexibility and time freedom. That was non-negotiable. And at the time, my ex-husband was traveling about 4 days a week for work. And that had been the norm most of our marriage. So I think for a lot of us that had COVID divorces, life kind of puts you in front of each other. And then you see how messed up it is, because a lot of us had situations that created distractions from seeing what it was. And I was one of those people. So I joined a real estate investor community in December 2019. I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn how to be a real estate investor. I want flexibility, time, freedom, abundance, blah, blah, blah. And 4 months in, I'm doing the real estate thing. I don't like it. Part of me was like, I want to help people. I have someone close in my life that is an alcoholic, and I wasn't living with active alcoholism for a long time. And I was part of these rooms of what's called Al-Anon, which is recovery for families of alcoholics. And I was part of this spiritual program for 10 years nearly. And the premise of Al-Anon is not about fixing the alcoholic. It's about coming home to you. It's about loving you. It's being good with you despite whatever chaos is happening in your life. And when shit's hitting the fan, you're still good within you because you've created such a strong foundation for yourself. So this Al-Anon thing was as part of my past, and it had been for a while. And so I'm part of this real estate investor community, and I'm doing the thing, I'm kind of walking the walk, and I don't like it. And just started kind of going to the world of personal development. And I found these people that were coaches that were getting paid to coach. And I'm like, wait, that's a thing? I can do that? What is that? And somebody told me along the way, it's like, Karishma, if you ever want to coach, if you ever want to have your own business, you have to be able to learn how to sell. And initially I was like, oh, absolutely not, this and that. And then after a few months, I'm like, okay, enough is enough. I have to get out of my own way and I need help. And when COVID hit, I hired my first business coach, and he taught me all the things on how to make coaching a business. At the same time, COVID happens, and I'm putting all this stuff on Facebook at the time. I'm just being good with yourself despite times of uncertainty, and your confidence, your self-worth. And I'm just kind of sharing these little tidbits of things that I picked up along the way with no attachment to people seeing it, any of that. And the woman who is the Real Estate Investor Network, is the biggest network in Texas, follows me. And when COVID hit, she reached out to me. She's like, Karishma, can we talk? I love what you're posting on social media. Would you be open to having a webinar for our real estate investor community? And this is a paid community. People have paid $25,000 plus to be part of this community. And I'm like, okay, I'd love to help. I'd love to serve. So I show up on this thing, and I have 300 people at this webinar, and I have no CTA, no call to action. I had never done a sales call. I had no idea what the heck was to sell anything. I was just sharing from my heart and just wanted to help people. And that was the premise of why I came into coaching. A couple of weeks later, my coach was like, Karishma, you got to have a CTA, you got to call to action, you got to bring people in, you got to do this, you got to do that. I'm like, okay. So I follow the path, and, within a few months, I start getting clients. And right around June or so, I hit my first 6-figure sales month. I was like, oh my God, I've won the lottery, right? It's a big deal. I've done this thing. And again, I had this huge fight inside of me where I was like, I'm going to be the coach that has the most sales. I want to help people. And I'm also going to be number one, because I had this desire to prove myself, right? So I'm doing all the things. And now the same business that I came in for time freedom, I do exactly the thing that I told myself I wouldn't do. And I'm working on the clock. I'm taking sales calls on the weekends. I'm doing all the things because I'm I'm going to win. And you guys watch me, watch me win. And I'm going to be better, do better, and make more money than everybody else. And this thing that became a love of service became this also I had this drive to like prove who I was. And it was very pain driven. I can see it now. I couldn't see it then. And I remember it was like, I was messaging my coach. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this has happened. Like, I'm so happy. I'm so grateful. And I did feel grateful. But then it was interesting because at the time, my ex-husband, every time I would have a sale, I'd be like, oh my God, I got a sale. Like, I got a client. And he'd be like, oh, great. I'm so happy for you. And then I would see like over time as the sales increased, you can tell when someone's happy for you. Genuinely, you could tell when someone's not happy for you. And I knew it wasn't about me. I knew it was about him and that he was in the IT consulting world. He had been for a long time. And every business that he had touched, he had failed on. And I'm going to say like, I really don't believe there's failure. There's only feedback. And he was very insecure about that piece because he'd always wanted to be a successful entrepreneur. And he'd seen a lot of his friends that were like less educated than him. So now here's me, his wife, who had never really taken any business seriously. First business that I touched, I'm quote unquote successful. And it made him very insecure. And so I could see that something was happening. And it's almost like you feel like guilty for making the win. And that's what started happening. And then a few weeks later, again, now you have this bar that you set for yourself and you win, right? Now I got to make more than what I did because I set this bar. Now what do? I only push harder. I grind harder because that's all I know how to do. And that's what worked the first time. This time it didn't work. And within the next month, I barely went from that 6-figure sales month to barely making 4 figures, finding myself like in bed for nearly 6 weeks, could not get my shit together, could not get out of bed. And this is a business that I loved. I loved coaching people. I loved my clients. And I could not figure out for the life of me what was wrong. And I felt like the biggest failure on the planet because it's like, what is wrong with me? Like, why can't I just push through this, even though I'm great at helping people get out of their own way and do amazing things and have amazing businesses? And I found the mentor that I have had since then. And when I asked him, when I came on the call, I said, Karishma, I need help with my business. I need to start making money in my business. And he said, Karishma, what's going on with your marriage? And I was like, well, what's the connection? Like, I don't see the connection. I'm asking about my business. There's nothing to do with my relationships. And the truth is, at that point, being married for almost 16 years at the time, we'd been in and out of counseling for like the first year we were in counseling and we were in and out for years. Like, that's how messed up it was for such a long time. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, this has nothing to do with my marriage. We're talking about my business. And he's like, no, Karishma, how safe do you feel in your marriage? And it's almost like somebody just like looked at the deepest part of me, the part of me that felt I had the most shame or insecurity or unworthiness about. And all of a sudden somebody just went there and went right to it. And when safety and not in like he was hurting me, harming me or that stuff, I wasn't safe to be in my light. I wasn't safe to be in my abundance. I wasn't safe to win in that energy of insecurity with him. And I was always dimming myself to match his vibration, to match his energy. And he was like, give him a timeline, like tell him what you need, blah, blah, blah. And then either you decide that you're going to be together, you stay, or you choose yourself and you leave. And it still took another year of unraveling for me. And then fast forward a year later, I was at this NLP conference, a retreat. And one of the things with NLP, neurolinguistic programming, which is what Tony Robbins uses and all the things, is to help you unravel your deepest core wounding, your deepest core belief. And my belief around love was that I was unlovable. And I didn't realize that, again, it's unconscious, not conscious. But when it consciously came up and it was this thing that was like, oh my God, I actually believe I'm unlovable. If I truly believe I'm unlovable, I'm going to pick someone in my life that doesn't love himself because he has no capacity to love me. And I'm just basically perpetuating this cycle of unlovability and teaching my kids that this is normal to like have a relationship where the man ignores the wife ignores the husband. You're fighting all the time. And I heard the words like, I believe I'm unlovable. And then I also saw it for the joke that it was, because I know that if I'm on this planet, God loves me and I am lovable. The fact that I'm alive means that I'm lovable, that something bigger than me created me and put me on this planet. That was the other thing, that it's like the illusion was dismantled a year later. And I remember when we were going to my best friend's wedding and we had this deep conversation. I was like, you know what? I think our marriage is complete. Like, it's done. And he's like, okay. There was no fight. There was no push. And I was like, okay. And then we just started the process of moving into the divorce then. So yeah, it's just several things I think stacked into that moment of like, enough is enough. And I'm not going to stay in this and sacrifice my happiness anymore, that I'm worth more than that. I deserve more than that.
What really stood out to me in what you shared was the idea of dismantling the illusion, especially the illusion that success on the outside means everything is aligned on the inside. The illusion that if you do everything right, the degree, the marriage, the family, the career, you will automatically feel whole. And perhaps to some extent, the deepest illusion of all, that making yourself smaller is the price of belonging and maintaining harmony in a relationship. I recall that when my identity post my marriage was being reduced to not my education or profession, but rather how well I could take care of the household responsibilities, how well I could cook the multiple cuisines, is where I saw myself failing against that somewhat archaic gold standard of 3 warm Indian meals a day, working during my day job, and doing most of the household work here. And I think at that time, that measure became my yardstick for myself. And I saw myself becoming smaller and smaller in my own eyes because I couldn't measure up. And it took me quite some time to lift that veil off my eyes. This is just to say that even when we are accomplished, educated, financially independent, there can still be these deeply rooted dynamics around power, worth, and safety that are sometimes linked to some external validation and that we don't recognize in that moment. And sometimes it's not until something breaks, like in your case, your business burnout, or that moment of realizing that you didn't feel safe to fully shine, that you see that what's really underneath it. And what I find powerful in your story is that the real shift wasn't about strategy or scaling. It was really about worth, self worth. It was about realizing that you don't have to dim yourself to be loved. And that's really a very profound unlearning for many of us in our culture.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think one more thing I wanted to kind of share about is like having supported a lot of clients the last few years. Most of my clients are just like me. They're high achievers. And the coach that I started out being is very different than who I am today. So when my clients would come to me and like, Karishma, I'm struggling in my business, there was always a connection between relationships for them, just like there was a connection with relationships with me. And somehow they were dimming their lights. Somehow they were holding back from owning their authentic voice, owning their authentic truth. So the coaching that I did was like really helping them own their true power so that they could be that version of that authentic person within themselves, worthy, abundant, confident, whatever. And it shows up differently in your relationship and you start showing up differently in your business. There are such high performers when it comes to business and their relationships are struggling, but we can't go there because that's painful. And that means reiterating that you failed again, because the cultural piece, if you fail in your relationship, you're a complete failure as a human being. So you'll do whatever you can to avoid that pain that's sitting there. But until that pain is like met and reconciled, then you just have to push harder and you do more in your business, but you never feel fulfilled. You never feel happy because that void, you just can't fill that void with something else.
Then drawing on that for your life journey afterwards, because your business was still kicking off, and then you decided to make this decision and you parted your ways. And in a way, you said that it was something that he was also probably mentally ready for it now after all these years. But then how and when was that coming back to your self journey? Because also in one of your podcast episodes, you talk about returning back to safety and belonging to yourself. When did that piece start coming together? Because you also in the earlier part mentioned that certain part of your friendships and people around you changed. How was that post-divorce experience for you?
So I think the biggest thing to emphasize is like, the coming home to yourself, it was constant, right? It wasn't like it started and then it ended. It was like, even through that first period when that mentor of mine told me, Karishma, what's going on in your marriage? For me, it meant starting to open myself up to vulnerability, which was really hard. Because I was like, okay, if I'm in this marriage, I'm in this marriage. But if I'm not in this marriage, I'm not in this marriage. But like, how do I open myself up even more? So the first conversation was like opening myself up to my husband and saying, these are my needs. I want us to connect. I want us to talk. I want us to spend time with each other. I want us to like really try this relationship if we're going to do that. Was the first step, right? And then over time, it's like, okay, we're doing the same thing. Nothing's changed. And then you get to that point where it's like, enough is enough. But when my ex-husband moved out of my house, there was about a 6-month period between the time my separation happened and my divorce was finalized. And for me, nothing could have prepared me for like how much I'd felt like the rug was just swept under my feet. It was this feeling of like I completely had lost my grounding, literally. And again, life reflects how you feel about yourself. Life reflects how you are. And every sales call I would have with potential coaching clients, every person was somebody who was going through a massive transformation in her life, was in a massive like relationship upheaval, and like life was completely unstable for them. So therefore, they were no position to make a commitment to themselves to like enhance the quality of their business and life. So it was interesting because my mentor at the time was like, Karishma, if you can take a pause and just pause selling. And again, I'm 100% commission-based entrepreneur. I'm going to encourage you to just pause for a few months until things settle. And I had no choice but to listen because every potential sales call was a shit show. I had no choice but to listen. So I unwillingly like took that step. And then I had all this time on my hands and I got married when I was 23, almost 24. I was like, I'm going to go out and date. I'm going to go explore because I have no idea what it's like to date. And again, I'd been in this relationship for 17 years where I hadn't gotten attention. I hadn't been seen. I hadn't been like valued. Again, I had all of this time now because I'm not working as much. I still had my kids a lot of the evening, but my daytime's opened up. Or when he would have the kids, a few days a month, he would have the kids. And I was like, what am I going to do? And I just started dating and getting out there. And initially, it was like putting all this energy outside to try to get validation on the outside. And I guess I had to go through that process. And it's interesting because kind of look back at the first couple of dates into the last few dates. The first guy that I went on a date with, he was a narcissist. And it was a very painful process. And I'm not going to like hide the intensity of it. But, it's like I had to go through this journey. And initially I was putting so much time and energy into like, I don't know what it was that I wanted. Maybe it was a partner that gave me attention. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was a relationship. Like I don't know, I wasn't ready to get married, obviously, but I think I wanted the right guy, right? Everybody wants the right guy. And I was putting so much energy and time in going out, getting dressed up, like all the energy time it takes to date, which is exhausting. And my best friend was like, Karishma, just stop putting all this energy and focus on others, focus on you. And I didn't know how to be alone. I didn't know how to not distract myself because even work was a big distraction for me. I had a few clients outside of some other marketing stuff. So I'm rarely working 5 to 10 hours a week at this point. And I had all this time and I was just like so focused on external validation, external this, external that, still feeling like the rug was pulled out under me. And I think for the first time, like just over that course of the first 6 months, like things started to change within me. For the first time, I'd give myself permission to cry because I had no choice because they were there and there were a lot of tears, and because again, I didn't have the pressure of like having to be somewhere or have a lot of work stuff, just slowly being okay with like taking it slow. There were days where I couldn't get out of bed, being okay with just like starting to soothe myself and mothering myself in a way that I'd never mothered myself, that never given myself permission to. Just being okay, being sad, being okay, being angry, being okay, feeling my feelings. And it was just slow unraveling. And then as like, I guess the 6 months goes on, I probably had like 50 first dates I share about in my podcast episode, but like just getting out there and just like realizing over time that there was nothing someone outside could give me that I couldn't give me. I had to see myself. I had to love myself. I had to validate myself. I had to be okay with myself. I had to like be okay with all the feelings that I had. And there were a lot of them. And for the first time when everything was taken away and all these guys were like dimwits because they had to be, because if they weren't, then I would have easily distracted and made that into the next thing, right? I just started realizing like, you know what, even me like putting that hour to get dressed and driving an hour, right? Dating takes a lot of time and energy. Like I'd rather take that extra hour for me. And I started dating myself and I started like going to restaurants that I liked, ordering for myself, like going on long drives, blasting my music, like having nobody accountable for me. And even today, like I still savor those moments. Like I need those moments where there's nothing going on and I'm only accountable to myself. And then, right on the 6-month mark, I was like, you know what? I'm taking myself off the dating sites. I'm not doing this anymore. It's not worth it. And I just completely stopped. And I was like, I'm going to honor just me, just Karishma, nobody else. I'm going to take the space and time. And the guy I'm with, I wasn't looking for it. I was just focusing on me being whole and complete. And when I was whole and complete, I got to the point where I was like, okay, God, I'm like 40 years old. I guess I'm okay being alone. I don't need anything. I'm really content in my skin. I've got everything that I need. I've got my kids. I've got my life. I've got my house. Like I'm good with me. I don't need anything. And at that point, God brought exactly the relationship that I needed to be able to receive. And even then, it's been this unwinding of all this from my marriage and just like me being more good with me and letting go continuously of all the baggage. And it's a process over time.
And you're so right. It is a process, and we're all slowly becoming in a way. And I totally also relate to the seeking external validation before going within, and how you said to mother yourself and honor yourself before you felt so abundant and secure that there it is, you're ready for more nurturing relationship, and it just automatically happened for you. And coming to maybe our last question then, if some woman out there is listening to us and is struggling with this decision of whether to say, whether to let go, what would be the one advice that you would give on that decision? But also, especially for those who have children, because at least I can say this for myself that not having children made many things simpler for me in terms of the process, in terms of the responsibility I had to carry and deal with. Even though that was also hard, I understand the complexity of having children. And I also know that post divorce and through your podcast, that you even managed to have a very excellent co parenting relationship with your ex husband, where you talk about a trip that all of you took together recently. So, very curious to know how and what message would you like to share with our listeners who may be finding themselves in a similar situation?
Yes, a couple of things. One is, when it comes to the kids, your children are watching you. And our children do what we do, not what we say. And, I think it's really important to see yourself almost like as if you're looking at yourself as an observer, almost like you're not you. And just like, what is this behavior teaching my children? What am I modeling to my children? And like starting to have that honest discourse with yourself, I think is really important. A lot of times, like we human beings are in our heads. We go in our mind to justify everything. And when we start like dropping from, I say like from our head to our heart and start feeling our feelings, and it's so hard, right? It's so hard initially because you want to justify, you want to like overanalyze, you want to do this, you want to do that. And we Indians are so good at all those things. And I was too. But if you start just like asking yourself, like, how do I feel right now? How do I feel right now? Our bodies will tell us how we feel. We'll start noticing that there are feelings of hurt, there are feelings of pain, there's feeling of sadness, there's feeling of like confusion. And, if we start just like coming back into our bodies, into our hearts, and just like, you know what, I'm really feeling sad right now. And just noticing, like asking yourself the hard questions, like, am I really happy here? Is this what I want? Is this what I want my kids to notice? I've asked clients like the hard questions, like, okay, if your daughter were in this situation, and I'm going to use the word daughter on purpose, like, what would you tell her? And always the advice that we quote unquote give our daughters is advice that we're not willing to take ourselves, but really like asking yourself the hard question of what is that I want? What is really happening? Maybe that's the first step. And recognizing whatever patterns are happening in your household, your children will absolutely mimic those patterns. They will. And I feel like those of us that are brave enough to leave, we're teaching our children a different way. In my family, I have such layers of lineage stuff around women being unseen, not being validated, not like being worthy in their households. My mom experienced it. Her mother experienced it. Her sisters experienced it, right? And when we start like breaking that and we choose to walk away, we're breaking, and they say 7 generations forward, 7 generations past, that is the impact of our actions. So for me, I believe like the whole purpose of life, I feel, is to love ourselves, to live a life that's free without pain, that's purposeful. And if we start aligning ourselves with that version of what we want and saying, you know what, maybe some part of me actually deserves love, deserves joy. And a lot of times it's hard for us to know what the 10 steps are, but what is one step I can take today to love myself even more? So for me, even before the divorce was filed, it was like being aware more and more every single day of what Karishma wanted, what Karishma needed, and starting to be okay to give myself those things. And that's how I believe safety is built. Safety isn't external, it's internal. When I'm okay feeling my feelings, being okay with myself, taking the action, and just start building my own foundation for safety, that foundation for safety, nobody can ever take away from me. So, my business has gone through multiple iterations. It's come and it's gone. It's come and it's gone. It's changed so many times. No matter what's happened with the business, I'm okay today. I have an amazing relationship. If the partner goes away, I'm still okay today. Why? Because I'm good with me today. And that's the magic. And how we get to that is just like honoring ourselves one day at a time and saying, you know what? How can I love me today? How can I give to me today? Not somebody else giving to me. What do I need to give to me so that I feel good? I feel safe. I feel seen. I feel secure. And for me, it's just been a process and a journey of like honoring me one day at a time.
That's a lovely way to conclude our episode today. Parenting yourself and having affection for your inner self. That's a good way to have a goalpost that can keep motivating you before you arrive at that practical decision, which could have other considerations for people like legal aspects or financial aspects. But I think the goalpost being clear on what makes you happy and that inner child happy is a great way to start that inner reflection. Thank you so much, Karishma, for all of this very interesting inputs that you've shared and snippets of your life and the kind of openness and vulnerability also that you've shown. And I'm sure there's a lot more to dive into this and learn from your podcast. I know that I've been listening in and I'm really enjoying those conversations. Some of them I have to literally pause and write stuff out for myself that what are my thoughts on some of those very deep questions you ask. And I would urge all our listeners to also do the same. Anything last that, Karishma, is on top of your mind that we haven't asked you that you want to share?
The last thing that is coming up for me is like, you are the source of everything. You are the source of your love. You're the source of your joy. You're the source of your abundance. And, Harveen, I just commend you for having a platform like this. Somehow through just grace, synchronicities, I'll call it, I met some amazing other women just like you that are brave enough to share messages. And, the taboo of divorce is still there. I know it because I experienced it. But, we all have an opportunity today. And I believe that's how we change the planet one person at a time. So thank you for just allowing me this beautiful space and for just sharing parts of my story and just inviting me to be here. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karishma. We all need to pour more into ourselves, as you said. Thank you so much for your time and your words. As the conversation comes to a close with Karishma, I keep thinking about the quiet moments, the ones no one sees. The moment you realize you've been performing and having this persona of a strong person, the moment you notice you don't actually feel safe to shine, the moment you admit that success means nothing if you're abandoning yourself to maintain it. Which is why this particular story wasn't a story just about a marriage ending. It was really a story about illusion ending, about recognizing that love without accepting yourself is really just survival and not a true partnership, about choosing to stop shrinking, even when shrinking is what once kept the peace. And maybe that's the real courage to realize that you are allowed to outgrow roles that no longer fit. You are allowed to model something different for the next generation. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to endure, but to return to yourself. So as you leave this episode, I invite you to sit with one question. Where in my life am I negotiating with my own worth? You don't need to fix it today, just notice it. Awareness is where everything begins. If this episode resonated, share it with someone who might be quietly questioning their own normal, their own worth. And if you found yourself reflected in this story, I hope it reminds you you are not too much and you are not asking for too much. You are allowed to be fully seen. Until next time.
Thank you for joining us. If you valued this conversation, please share the podcast, rate it, and subscribe to Sunoh wherever you get your podcast from, so that you get notifications with each new episode. It helps more people to find us and join this community. You can also find all the details about the guest in the show notes as well as on our social media pages. Please note that this podcast is for informational purposes only and does not replace legal, therapeutic, or other professional guidance that you or someone close to you may need, catering to their specific situation. If you are in a dangerous situation, please contact the nearest hotline or authorities where you can find the help you need. Since our podcast caters to global audience, we are unable to share a lot of country-wide resources. But I'm sure your country, your state, your city, wherever you're listening from, has some resources available for you. To share your story or feedback, please reach out to us.
Thank you for listening to us, and until next time.